Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. They say sleep paralysis is just the brain misfiring, a harmless glitch between waking and dreaming. That's what I used to believe, until I saw it. A figure, darker than shadow, standing at the edge of my bed, watching, waiting. At first, it only came when I couldn't move, but then it started knocking. Just once, every night, always closer than the night before. And no matter how loud I screamed inside my own mind, my body refused to respond. Now, I don't just see it in my dreams. It stands at my door when I'm awake. Sometimes I hear it whisper my name. Sometimes I feel it brushing past me when I know I'm alone. I tried to leave. I tried to run. But you can't outrun something that lives in the space between sleep and reality. The knocking hasn't stopped, and I fear that one night it won't knock at all. It'll just let itself in. I never used to think much about sleep. It was just a daily reset, something automatic, like brushing your teeth or turning off the lights. You close your eyes, the world fades, and you drift. That's how it was for most of my life. Uneventful, peaceful. But peace is a delicate thing. You don't realize how fragile it is until something invades it. That invasion came one night, quietly, and without reason. No stressful day, no trauma, no clues. I went to bed like always, phone on the nightstand, blanket pulled just under my chin. My last memory was the ceiling fan turning slow, hypnotic circles. Then suddenly, I was awake, but nothing moved. Not my arms, not my legs, not even my lungs. I was awake, completely, but I couldn't breathe. The panic didn't arrive all at once. At first, there was confusion, like my brain was slowly peeling back layers of fog. I was aware of the room, my walls, my window, the hum of electricity somewhere in the distance. But I couldn't move. I tried to shift my fingers. Nothing. I tried to scream, to even whisper. My throat felt sealed shut. That's when the fear kicked in. A sharp electric current that stabbed through my chest and spread to every frozen limb. I wasn't dreaming. I knew that. This wasn't some half-formed nightmare I could blink away. This was real. I was in my body, completely conscious and completely paralyzed. Then, as if on cue, the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. As though something had stepped into the room, and every molecule responded. It started in the corner, the darkest part of the room, where the shadows swallowed everything. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks. Maybe I was seeing shapes in the dark, like people do with clouds. But the shape didn't shift or fade. It stayed, a figure, tall, narrow, wrong. It was darker than everything around it. Not like the absence of light, but like the presence of something anti-light, something that refused to reflect anything. I couldn't see eyes, couldn't see a face, but it was looking at me. I could feel it. My skin screamed with the sensation. My whole body became a nerve, and it began to move. Not like a person, not like anything natural. It just glided, inches at a time. Slow, measured, deliberate, like it was savoring every second. Each moment stretched longer than it should. The clock on my wall ticked once and felt like a minute passed. My chest burned from the effort of shallow, panicked breaths. The thing was halfway across the room now, and still, I couldn't move. I couldn't even close my eyes. It was like being chained in your own grave, watching something dig you up from the inside. Then it stopped, right at the edge of my bed. I could feel it, not touching me, but pressing against the air between us. The silence in the room grew louder, buzzing like 1,000 invisible insects. And then it bent down, as if studying me. Its head tilted sideways, almost curious, and just inches from my face. I heard it, a sound, low, vibrating, impossible. It wasn't a growl, not really. It was more like a hum, deep, bone-rattling, not coming from its mouth, but from the space around it. A sound I could feel in my teeth, in the back of my skull, in the marrow of my arms. I didn't understand the sound, but I understood it. The same way you understand when a wild animal stares at you in the woods, and you just know you're prey. That's what I was in that moment. I wasn't a person, I wasn't anything, just a pinned thing beneath something ancient and hungry, and utterly still. It didn't move, it didn't strike, it just watched. And somehow, that was worse, far worse, because when something moves, you can prepare, but when something waits, you have to ask why. Then, as if it had grown bored, it pulled back. The sound faded, the air lightened, and my lungs expanded like a balloon on fire. I gasped so hard it hurt, like my first breath was made of knives. My limbs jerked violently. I rolled off the bed and hit the floor, sobbing, coughing, gagging on nothing. I sat there, back against the wall, staring at the corner where it had first appeared. There was nothing there, just shadow. I didn't sleep again that night. I didn't turn off the lights for the rest of the week, and I didn't talk about it. Who would believe me? People dream strange things all the time, but I knew this wasn't a dream. It hadn't felt like a dream. It had waited, it had studied me, and somehow I knew it wasn't done. The second night came, and I prepared. Lights on, TV playing, my phone flashlight app open and glowing on my pillow. I took deep breaths. I repeated logic in my head, like a mantra. It was a dream, a hallucination. You were tired, but somewhere in the back of my skull, doubt kept whispering. My fingers trembled as I finally laid back down. Sleep took longer, came slower, but it did come, and for a while there was peace. Nothing but the soft flicker of the screen, until exactly 3:34 a.m. That's when I heard it. A knock, one knock, not on the door, not on the wall, but from inside the room, sharp, singular, like a knuckle on wood. I sat up so fast my vision blurred, but nothing was there, just stillness. But it was too familiar now. That knock wasn't a random sound, it was a promise. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that it was just the sound of the building settling, pipes shifting in the walls, maybe a neighbor moving something heavy at an ungodly hour. But I knew better. You always do when something truly unnatural touches your life. The knock was too clean, too close, too intentional. It didn't echo. It didn't happen again. It was one deliberate sound, like a stranger tapping gently on a window not to be let in, but to let you know they're already inside. I didn't sleep after that. I didn't even try. I sat up against the wall, blanket around me, like it could shield me, heart pounding through hours of nothing happening. No more sounds, no more shadows, but the silence didn't comfort me. It taunted me, like something was holding back, just out of reach, waiting for me to fall asleep again. The next day, I couldn't function. I forgot simple things, turning off the stove, locking the door, answering my phone. I stared at people, like they were speaking a language I used to understand, but had long forgotten. No one noticed. No one ever does. You can walk through a normal day, completely shattered inside, and the world just keeps turning. I kept my head down. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, that my mind was short-circuiting from lack of rest. But I could feel something was different now, like I was being followed by a shadow that never touched the ground. I started checking over my shoulder in broad daylight. I flinched at creaks in the floor. I walked faster, even in crowds. It felt like that thing, whatever it was, had taken something from me that night. Not just peace, something deeper. That night, I didn't want to go home. I stalled, went out of my way to buy things I didn't need, walked through aisles aimlessly, just to kill time. I even considered getting a hotel, somewhere brightly lit, with people nearby, with cameras in the hallways, somewhere safe. But I didn't. I told myself I couldn't be ruled by a dream, that if I gave in, I'd never stop looking over my shoulder. So I went home. The second I opened the front door, something felt wrong again. The air was too still, the lights too sharp, like the room was trying too hard to pretend it was normal. I left every light on, kept a flashlight in my hand, set my phone to record audio, just in case. Then I waited. I lay down, eyes open, daring it to happen again, and I wasn't disappointed. This time, it didn't wait for me to sleep. I heard the knock while I was wide awake. 3 sharp taps on the wall behind my bed. Not slow, not fast, just steady, like someone who wasn't in a hurry. I bolted upright and spun around. There was nothing, but the sound had been inches from my head. I could still feel the vibration in the wood. I turned on the voice recorder, rewound it, and it was there, clear as day. 3 knocks, loud, precise. I stared at the waveform on the screen, like it was a confession. I hadn't imagined it. I had proof that should have terrified me. It did, but it also made me feel less insane. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain, but it was real. I wasn't alone in the room. Not anymore. Sleep came in fragments. 5 minutes here, 10 there. I would jolt awake to nothing, gasping like I'd fallen. I started dreaming while I was awake. Flashes of the figure standing in different corners of my apartment, sometimes near the kitchen, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes just inches from my face. I'd blink, and it would be gone. But each time the terror stayed. It lingered like the aftertaste of smoke. I told myself I was unraveling, and maybe I was. But deep down, a darker thought took hold. What if I wasn't losing my mind? What if this thing was feeding off the unraveling? The more afraid I became, the more present it felt. Like my fear was a signal, an invitation, and I had opened the door. I tried researching everything: sleep paralysis, shadow figures, hallucinations, even folklore. I went down digital rabbit holes late into the night, scrolling through forums filled with people who had seen similar things. They used different names: the Hat Man, the Watcher, the Sleeper, but they all described the same sensation: eyes watching, limbs frozen, presence pressing. Some claimed it was a demon, others thought it was a guardian. A few believed it was death itself, but no one knew how to make it stop. That was the worst part. Everyone could feel it, but no one had answers. It was as if we were all living separate versions of the same nightmare, and no one had ever truly woken up. And just as I was starting to think maybe it would never get worse, the knocking changed again. The third night, I fell asleep for maybe an hour. I don't even remember closing my eyes. I just remember waking up, again, frozen, but this time, I wasn't alone in the room. I didn't need to see it to know. The air was thick with its presence. My skin crawled before I even registered what was happening. It didn't knock. It didn't hum. It breathed. Not like a person. Not like an animal. It was slow, deliberate, drawn out. A sound I could feel against my cheek. Like it was standing beside my bed, inches from my face, exhaling into the space where my soul lived. My body strained against the paralysis. My mind clawed to get out. And still, I couldn't move. I couldn't run. I couldn't wake. I lay there, helpless, as something not of this world stood beside me, breathing in the rhythm of death. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. I understood what it wanted. It wanted to come closer.
The fourth night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I sat upright on the bed, legs crossed, the lamp still on, phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. Every 20 minutes, I stood and paced, drank water, checked my locks. I even opened the closet just to be sure, a habit I hadn't had since childhood. But when something knocks from inside your walls, childhood habits don't feel silly anymore. The fear wasn't explosive anymore. It was dull now, a constant ache in the back of my skull, like an infection spreading slowly. I felt it behind everything, my thoughts, my movements, my breath. The fear was always waiting. It had rooted itself inside me. I realized it wasn't just haunting my nights. It was trying to live here, with me, inside me. And that night, something about the knock changed. It came at exactly the same time, 3:34 a.m. But this time, it didn't knock once. It knocked twice. The second knock was louder. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. It was like the entire room had been vacuum sealed. The second that second knock landed, my eyes flicked to the wall beside my bed, the same place it always came from. There was no damage, no scratch, no hole, but I knew it was there, right behind it. Standing perfectly still, hand resting on the other side of the drywall, just waiting. I started to wonder if it had always been there. If the first time I experienced sleep paralysis, it hadn't come to me. It had woken me, made itself known, revealed just a sliver of its shape so I'd notice. And now that I had, it wasn't going to stop. That night, I didn't move until sunrise. My back ached, my neck was stiff, and my eyes burned from staying open so long. But I didn't care. It hadn't come inside. That was a win. I told myself that like it was something I could hold on to. The next day at work I broke down. In the middle of a meeting, mid-sentence, I just stopped. Couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. I stared at the carpet like it would swallow me whole. Someone asked if I was okay. I nodded. I wasn't. Not even close. I spent the next hour in the bathroom, locked in a stall, hands shaking so badly I couldn't text. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, sunken. My eyes weren't mine anymore. There was something hollow behind them, something that had grown deeper with every night. I thought about quitting, about checking myself in somewhere. But how do you explain that the thing unraveling you isn't stress or trauma, but something knocking on your wall at 3:34 every morning? You can't, you just carry it. Alone. That night, I made a mistake. I left the lamp on again, but this time, I turned off the hallway light. Something about the contrast, the sudden sharpness of shadow in the corners, made the room feel thinner, like the walls were folding in. I sat with my back to the wall again, but this time, I didn't face the room. I faced the window. I watched the light from the street lamps flicker across the glass, and somewhere deep in my bones, I felt it again. That shift, that hum, that soft, low-pressure drop that meant it was near. The knock didn't come right away. It waited. 5 minutes, 10. I held my breath, and when I thought maybe I'd outrun it, it knocked, but not on the wall this time. It knocked on the closet door. I stared at it, heart hammering so hard I felt nauseous. The closet was no more than 5 feet from me. I could see the door clearly, slightly cracked, like it always was. But this time, the space inside felt deep, far deeper than it should. The knock had come from within that darkness, not behind the wall, not outside the room, from inside my space. It had moved. It was adapting, testing, learning what made me freeze, what made me panic. I sat paralyzed, not from the old sleep state, but from dread so complete that my body refused to respond. I kept staring, waiting. Another knock, same door, a bit louder. This time, I whispered, not to it, but to myself. Please don't. I don't know what I meant. Please don't open. Time, please don't come out. Please don't choose tonight. It didn't open, not that night, but the message was clear. It was inside now. It had crossed some unseen line, not just from dreams into waking life, but from observer into occupant. And for the first time, I felt it wasn't just interested in scaring me. It was curious, like a hand pressing through thin ice, testing how far it could stretch without breaking through. It wanted more. Attention, time, recognition, and I'd been feeding it since the first night, hadn't I? Watching for it, listening, holding my breath. I had become part of its ritual, a witness, a participant, maybe even a host. That realization didn't come with terror. It came with something worse, resignation, like I'd already lost something I couldn't name. And now, I was just waiting for the moment it decided to take the rest. I didn't sleep at all that night. I watched the door until the sun came up, and when I finally stood, my knees buckled from exhaustion. But I wasn't thinking about rest anymore. I was thinking about preparation. I was thinking about boundaries, what was left of them. If it had started in a dream, then stood behind my wall, then stepped into my room, then what was next? My bed, my mind, my skin. I started thinking about salt, about crosses, about old stories I used to laugh at. I didn't laugh anymore. I didn't trust logic. Logic couldn't stop something that knew when I was asleep, that watched me blink, that breathed with me. I realized then it didn't need to break in. I had already left the door open. I started sleeping during the day, not because I felt safer, but because I needed the illusion of light. Sunlight made me feel like there was still a line between the real world and the thing that haunted me. At night, everything blurred. Shadows didn't end at corners anymore. They reached, crawled, pressed in. During the day, I'd doze on the couch with the curtains wide open, the TV humming low, the hum of life just outside my window, Cars, birds, distant voices, keeping me tethered. But the dreams followed. They weren't full episodes, just flashes. I'd see it in a hallway that didn't exist. I'd feel it standing behind me when no one else was in the room. I'd wake up with tears dried on my cheeks, with vague recollections of words that didn't belong in any language I knew. And every time I woke up to one knock, not in the dream. In the waking world, one knock, somewhere nearby. It began appearing earlier each night. At first, it was always 3:34 a.m., then 3 o'clock, then 2:15, then midnight. It felt like it was creeping backward through time, shortening the distance between us. Like it was learning when I was weakest, when my mind was fraying, when I wasn't quite awake, but not fully asleep. That's when it liked to visit most. Not in paralysis anymore, not with a hum or a breath, but with presence. I'd feel it standing just past the doorway, not moving, not making a sound, just waiting. Sometimes, if I stared long enough, I'd see something, a shape that didn't belong, a flicker where nothing should be. It was never obvious, that was the worst part. It was patient, subtle, it didn't need to rush. It knew I wasn't going anywhere. One evening, while washing my face in the bathroom, I saw it in the mirror, just for a second, over my shoulder, not in the hallway, but inside the room. It stood against the wall, where the shadow from the shower curtain dipped low. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I stared at it through the glass, like that would protect me. But it didn't move either, just stood there, tall and crooked, like it had been there a while, maybe longer than I realized. And then when I finally blinked, it was gone. No sound, no breath, but something lingered. The air felt touched. I backed out of the room like a child retreating from something it was never supposed to see. I slept on the living room floor that night. Lights on, phone flashlight, aimed at the hallway. But even there, I didn't feel safe. I knew it could follow. It had already followed me out of sleep. I started keeping notes. Times, temperatures, dates. I wrote down the knocks, where they came from, when they shifted. Which rooms I was in when I saw it. I didn't know what I was hoping for. A pattern maybe, a weakness, something I could control. But it was random. Or worse, it was personal, like it adapted around me. Like it knew when I was trying to track it, and changed just enough to keep me off balance. Some nights, there would be no knock, no hum, no breath, just the emptiness. Those nights were the worst. They tricked me into believing it was over. And then just when I started to exhale, it would return louder, closer, with new ways to remind me that I was still its favorite, that I belonged to it now. I stopped telling myself it was a sleep disorder. That ship had sailed. Sleep paralysis didn't leave bruises on your arms. It didn't whisper your name when you were brushing your teeth. It didn't leave the faint scent of something metallic in your hallway when you hadn't opened the door in days. Whatever this was, it was real. It had moved past dreams, past rules. I thought about telling someone, a friend, a therapist, but every time I pictured it, I imagined their face, the blank stare, the concerned nod, the slow suggestion of help. I didn't want, because they wouldn't understand. Not unless they saw it, not unless it chose them, and somehow I knew it wouldn't. It had chosen me, for a reason I still couldn't explain. Or maybe it didn't need a reason. Maybe it just found me first, and then something changed. The knock came not once, but 4 times, sharp, deliberate, rapid, almost playful. It came from the kitchen. I was in the living room, fully awake, TV on, door locked.
and the knock came not from the wall or the closet, but from inside the apartment. I froze. The air dropped like someone had opened a freezer. The TV distorted, just for a second, the sound stretching unnaturally before returning to normal. I didn't move. I couldn't. For the first time since this started, I didn't want proof. I didn't want to investigate. I just wanted to vanish. But then I heard something worse than the knock. I heard the chair in the kitchen scrape softly across the floor. It wasn't alone anymore. It was moving, exploring, becoming bold. I don't know how long I stayed frozen. Could have been seconds, could have been an hour. But eventually, I stood, moved toward the hallway, and shut the door to my bedroom. I didn't lock it. I didn't want to hear what would happen if it tried to open it. I just turned on the lamp, laid back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. No podcasts, no TV, just silence. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was something else, something colder. I was empty, drained. It taken so much already. My sleep, my joy, my sense of safety. And I realized that night, this wasn't going to end. It wasn't building up to some final scare. There was no climax. It was a presence, a rhythm, a thing that had become real, simply because I had noticed it. And now, it would never leave.
The worst part wasn't the knocks, or the breathing, or even the figure in the mirror. The worst part came when it started following me beyond my home. For a while, my apartment had been the cage, and I had accepted it. A prison wrapped in drywall and dread. But all prisons need walls. When I left for work, I'd always felt a moment of relief. Even sleep-deprived and paranoid, I could pretend to be normal among people. But that illusion broke the morning. I heard the knock outside, not near my door but in the alley, beside the parking garage. I was walking past, coffee in one hand, half-focused, when I heard it. 3 quick knocks, right on the metal dumpster. I stopped. The sound echoed too long, like it had been meant only for me. I didn't turn around right away, but when I did, the alley was empty. Still, the air had that weight again, like it had carried something unnatural from place to place, like it had followed me there. The rest of the day was drenched in unease. Every sound felt sharper, every door creak, every elevator ding, every tap of a co-worker's pen hit like a warning. I stared too long at dark reflections in my computer screen. The glass in the office bathroom seemed deeper than usual, like it was no longer reflecting, just watching. At one point, while reviewing a spreadsheet, I swear I saw something move just beyond the cubicle wall. A black shape, quick and tall, like a shadow out of sync with its source. When I got up to check, there was nothing, but the hum had returned. That low, bone-thick vibration that didn't come from the air conditioning, or the lights, or anything else. It came from nowhere. It came from me. And that's when I realized it wasn't attached to my apartment. It was attached to me. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. So I did the thing desperate people do. I tried to make contact. I whispered under my breath, "What do you want?" in the break room when no one was around. I left a note on the mirror in my bedroom with the same question, hoping I'd wake up to a sign. I wanted it to stop, but part of me, the part I hated, also wanted a response. Any response. I just wanted to know if it understood. That night, I didn't sleep at home. I crashed on a co-worker's couch after pretending I'd had too much wine at a dinner party. It was just an excuse to be somewhere else, somewhere safe. But at 3:34 a.m., I woke up to the same knock, not on a wall or a door, but on the window. A single tap, a slow, heavy knock. Her apartment was on the 4th floor. I didn't wake her. I didn't want her to think I was crazy. Instead, I laid there, clutching the blanket, staring at the ceiling, while every part of my body buzzed with cold terror. I didn't move until the sun peeked through the blinds. When I checked the window, there were no smudges, no signs of anything at all, just my reflection, pale and haunted. I went home without saying much. The rest of the day, I barely spoke. Something had changed. It didn't matter where I went now. The knocks came anyway, always at the same time, always followed by that pressure, that stillness, that unblinking awareness. I had become its anchor. It didn't knock because it wanted in. It knocked because it already was in. I stopped using mirrors completely. I covered them with blankets, towels, jackets, anything I could tape over the glass. Even my phone screen, when black, gave me anxiety. I kept the brightness all the way up, just to avoid seeing my reflection in the dark. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse, in a passing window, in a pot lid, even in someone's sunglasses, and I'd see it. Not clearly, but the suggestion of it. A hint of long limbs, of hollow presence, of a shape just barely misaligned with reality. It was never in front of me, always behind, always close, and never leaving. Then came the ringing, not in my ears, but in my phone. At 3:34 a.m., 2 nights in a row, I received a call from an unknown number. No voicemail, just the ringing. The first night, I declined it without thinking. The second night, I stared at the screen until it stopped. My hand wouldn't move to answer. I was terrified of what I'd hear, if I did. But I played the voicemail box anyway, just static. Except underneath, I could almost hear breathing. Not a voice, not a message, just that low, slow inhale and exhale I'd come to recognize. Like it had found a way to crawl into the wires, to reach further, to remind me nowhere is safe, not even inside my own devices. That was when I understood. It wasn't haunting a location. It wasn't haunting a time. It was haunting me, my sleep, my space, my perception, and now my connection to everything. The knock had become a language, a declaration. Every tap was another sentence in a message I couldn't yet translate, but deeply understood. It was saying, "You belong to me now," and the scariest part, it didn't even need to be angry. It didn't scream or growl or chase. It didn't need to. It just waited. Closer, louder, more certain every time, as if it knew the truth long before I did. I had never imagined it. I had simply answered it. The moment I saw it that first night, I let it in. I started talking to it, not in a ritualistic way, not with candles or symbols, just quietly, under my breath, like you would to someone living in your house you didn't want to disturb. The first time was in the shower. I had been hearing the knocks outside the bathroom for 2 nights in a row, always when the water ran, as if the sound of the rushing covered it up. So I whispered, "I know you're there." No response, but the knocking stopped. It didn't come back the next night. Instead, I found something else. A deep hum in the pipes when I turned the faucet, not mechanical, but vocal, like something mimicking sound. Testing tone. That's when I realized it had been listening all along. Not just knocking, not just watching, listening,
learning my voice. At first, it mimicked subtly. I would hear myself saying things I hadn't said, fragments of phone conversations I never had, spoken in my voice, but in a different rhythm. I once heard my own voice say, "Come here," from the hallway while I was brushing my teeth. Another time, I heard laughter, not loud, not manic, just soft, like a joke I'd forgotten. But it was my laugh. The exact cadence, the same breath at the end. I ran to the hallway, phone camera shaking in my hand, and there was nothing, just still air. But when I listened closely to the video later, I could hear it in the background. A whisper, faint, repeating the word closer, not in my voice this time. In its own, a raspy, breathless tone that slid under your skin like cold water down your spine. From then on, my own voice stopped feeling like mine. I became hyper-aware of how I spoke, how I breathed, how I moved. I stopped talking aloud, unless I had to. I feared it would learn too much. I feared I was feeding it with sound, just like I had fed it with fear. My friends noticed. They started asking if I was sick, distant. "You sound like you're somewhere else," one of them said during a phone call. I almost asked her if she heard anyone else in the background, but I stopped myself, because sometimes, during those calls, I did hear someone else. A quiet breathing under the signal. A click, a static crackle, like a second line, had picked up halfway through the conversation, and every time, the voice would say nothing. Just listen. Then came the recording. I'd installed motion sensors in my apartment. A cheap security camera that activated with movement or noise, mostly for my own sanity. One morning, I checked the cloud log and found a 17-second clip recorded at 3:34 a.m. It started with silence, my living room dimly lit, empty, undisturbed. Then a soft knock, not on a door, but on the coffee table, followed by a low murmur. Then my voice, saying, "Why did you open it?" I hadn't said those words. I hadn't been in the living room. I hadn't even been awake. But it was me, no question. Same pitch, same crack in the throat. I watched it over and over, and still couldn't make sense of it. Had I sleepwalked? Was it an echo from some older recording layered into the file? I didn't know, but that question haunted me. What did I open? The answer came unexpectedly. I was at work again, trying to function, trying to pretend I wasn't unraveling. My boss was giving feedback in a one-on-one, and I wasn't really listening. Then she paused. Her expression shifted, and she asked, "Did you just say something?" I blinked. "No," she frowned. "I thought I heard your voice just now, behind me." She turned, looked down the hallway. No one there. I laughed it off, but my blood turned to ice. She had heard it too. For the first time, someone else had heard my voice in the wrong place, at the wrong time. It had copied me again, but now it was showing itself to others, not fully, just a taste, just a test. And that's when I realized it wasn't just copying me, it was becoming me. The changes got worse. My phone would ring with my name on the screen, as if I were calling myself. No number, just me. I never answered, but the voicemails kept coming. All of them were silent, except one. That one had my voice breathing into the speaker, whispering my own name again and again, getting closer each time. "Hey, hey, hey, hey," until the last one sounded like it was right beside the phone. I couldn't sleep after that, not even in the daylight. I began to feel like I was losing hold of myself. When I walked past mirrors, I didn't trust the movement in the glass. When I spoke aloud,
I immediately regretted it. I'd started flinching at my own voice, like I wasn't sure if it belonged to me anymore. Then one night, while half asleep on the couch, I heard the knock again. 4 raps. This time from the bathroom. I didn't move. I just stared at the darkened hallway. Then my own voice called from the bathroom. Come help me. Soft, desperate, exact. It sounded like I was trapped in there. It said it again. Come help me. Same tone, same volume, same way I'd ask for help if I were in trouble. And for the first time in weeks, I almost got up. Something in the way it said it, something so familiar, made my muscles twitch. But I stopped, because I remembered. I hadn't spoken aloud all day. Not once, not even to myself. That voice wasn't mine, not anymore. And if I stood up, I knew what would be waiting. I stayed on the couch the rest of that night, refusing to even look down the hallway. My body was frozen in a different kind of paralysis. Not the sleep-induced kind, but the soul-rooted kind. The kind that makes your limbs heavy and your thoughts flicker like faulty lights. That voice had been perfect. Not just similar, identical. It didn't imitate. It inhabited. And the worst part wasn't the voice. It was the emotion behind it. When it said, "Come help me," it didn't sound evil or monstrous. It sounded scared. Like I had somehow become 2 people, and one of them was trapped in the dark, knocking to be let back in. I remember thinking, in that terrifying moment, what if it's not copying me? What if it split me? What if it left a part of me in that space where sleep and silence overlap? And now it wants to trade places. The next few days were a blur. I avoided every reflection, every conversation, every quiet space where the air grew still enough to carry its breath. I unplugged my mirrors, boxed them up, covered my TV in a sheet. I stopped answering phone calls. Even texts started to feel suspicious, as if it had learned how to type, how to write like me. One day I got a message from my own number. It said, "I miss being inside." I deleted it instantly, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking for hours. I called the phone company. They told me it must have been a spoof. "It happens," they said. Nothing to worry about. But they didn't hear the things I did. They didn't wake up to breathing that didn't belong to anyone, or whispers that came from inside the walls. It began happening at work. The voice, the figure. One afternoon, during a meeting, someone knocked on the glass door of the conference room. Everyone looked up. No one was there. The hallway was empty, but the sound echoed strangely, like it hadn't come from the hallway at all, but from inside the room. Later that day, my co-worker stopped me in the break room. "I saw you earlier," she said, "but you didn't say anything when I called your name." I told her I hadn't passed her office. Her face went pale. Then who was standing outside my door? It was spreading, not just around me, but through me. I wasn't the only one who could see it now, but that didn't comfort me. It terrified me, because if it was showing itself to others, maybe it was preparing to replace me. I began recording myself at night, audio only. I didn't dare leave the camera on. The first few nights were quiet, just tossing and turning, the occasional breath. But then, on the 4th night, I heard something impossible. For nearly an hour, I was asleep and silent, until suddenly, I began speaking. Not murmuring, not dreaming, speaking clearly, in full sentences. "Don't answer," I said. "Don't open the door." Then silence, then my voice again. It wears my face. I don't remember any of it. I played the audio at least 20 times, trying to convince myself it had been a mistake, a glitch, but it was me. The fear in my own voice didn't sound acted. It sounded desperate, like a warning, not to someone else, to me. After that, I stopped trying to sleep. Every night became a countdown. I sat awake, staring at the door, waiting for the knock. It came without fail, always 4 times now, always from a new location, once from under the bed, once from inside the closet, once, worst of all, from right behind me. I didn't turn around. I just sat there, still, breathing shallowly, while the knocks echoed through my spine like static. And after each knock, a whisper would come, a new phrase each night. You let me out. You spoke first. You're tired of being you. They weren't threats. They were invitations. That's what terrified me the most. It didn't want to hurt me. It wanted me to agree. The world outside kept turning. Emails came. Bills arrived. My body went through the motions, hollow and detached. People began commenting on my appearance. You look thin. You sound strange. One day, my boss looked at me with real concern. Are you okay? She asked. You seem different lately. And I realized something horrifying. I couldn't remember the last time I saw myself. Really saw myself. The mirrors were gone. The reflections avoided. And now I wasn't sure who she was seeing anymore. Me, or the thing becoming me. I left work early that day. I went home. I shut every door. I unplugged every light. I sat in the dark. And for the first time, I whispered, "What do you want?" aloud. No reply came, just silence. And then, my own voice responded from the hallway. To be real, that night, I dreamed, but it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like surrender. I stood in my bedroom, but everything was reversed. The windows were on the wrong side. The shadows moved like they had their own intent. And standing in the corner, where I once saw it long ago during that first episode of paralysis, was me. Not just similar, not a reflection. Me, but different. Smiling too wide, blinking too slow, breathing with that same familiar rhythm. I tried to scream, but it raised a finger to its lips, and I listened. Not because I was afraid, but because it felt inevitable, like I had been walking toward this moment the entire time. The figure opened its mouth, and what came out wasn't sound. It was a knock. 4 deep, echoing raps that shook the world around me awake. When I woke from that dream, or vision, or whatever it truly was, I wasn't in my bed. I was on the floor, crumpled in a corner of the hallway, my arms crossed tightly around my body, like I'd been shielding myself from something. The lights were still off, the room still cloaked in darkness, but the silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like the pause between lightning and thunder. I didn't move at first. I didn't want to disturb whatever balance had kept it from pushing further. But then I heard it, a whisper, soft and deliberate, not behind a door or from the walls, but from my own throat. I wasn't speaking. I swear I wasn't. But I could feel the vibration in my vocal cords, as if something inside was using my body like a puppet. One word escaped. Ready. I stumbled back. Hands clutched around my neck, horrified at the sensation. I hadn't decided to say that. I hadn't even thought the word. It had formed without my will, spoken in my own voice, but with an intent that wasn't mine. That was the moment I realized something had changed. The knock, the mimicry, the shadowy presence, those had all been introductions, but now it was trying to merge.
It didn't want to visit me anymore. It wanted to speak through me, to move with me, to become me, in ways I couldn't undo. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but I didn't trust what would come out. I was afraid the voice would say something else, something I didn't know, something true. I went to the only mirror left in my apartment, the tiny one on the side of my microwave, the reflective steel surface, barely large enough to see both eyes at once. I stared. Nothing moved. Nothing looked strange. But I noticed something small, something off. My expression felt delayed, like it was keeping time with my thoughts, but lagging just half a second behind. I blinked. It blinked. I raised a hand. It followed, but there was no sense of ownership. I felt like I was observing someone else, a stranger in my skin, well dressed in my gestures, perfectly rehearsed. And when I whispered aloud, "Who are you?" my reflection didn't move its mouth. Only mine did. That should have comforted me. It didn't. It made me feel outnumbered. I covered that mirror too. No more glimpses, no more comparisons. If I couldn't trust my own body, if I couldn't be sure of who was looking back, I'd rather not see it at all. The rest of that day passed in a haze of detachment. I drifted through space like a person wearing an ill-fitting costume of themselves. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like paper. I tried to call someone, but halfway through dialing, I stopped because I imagined them hearing my voice on the other end and knowing instantly that something wasn't right, that the voice didn't belong to the person they loved, that it was speaking to them. I couldn't bear the thought of someone else hearing it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the kitchen with the light off, wrapped in a blanket, clutching a kitchen knife, not for protection, but for proof. If it took full control, if my hands moved without my permission, I would feel it. I would know. Hours passed in silence, but at exactly 3:34 a.m., the knock came again. 4 raps, not from the walls, not from the closet, from inside my chest. I felt it, a vibration, deep and undeniable, like my ribcage had become the door. I dropped the knife. It clattered across the tile. My hands were shaking again, but not out of fear. Out of recognition. I understood the knock this time. It wasn't asking for entry. It was letting me know. It was home now. I started hearing the voice during the day. Not aloud, not in the room. Inside my thoughts. It would complete my sentences, echo back my memories. It felt like a second narrator had taken residence in my head, walking behind my words, reciting them just milliseconds before I thought them myself. I couldn't tell what was mine anymore. I would think of going to the store, and the voice would say, "You'll take the long way." I'd think about calling someone, and it would answer, "They won't know it's you." It wasn't threatening. It wasn't cruel. It was confident, like it had always been here, like it had just been waiting for me to notice. And now that I had, it was no longer hiding. The last knock didn't come from outside. It didn't come from my chest. It came from inside my mind. A single soft rap, so gentle it could have been mistaken for a heartbeat. And when it landed, I heard my voice, my true voice, the one I'd forgotten, whisper, "You let it speak." I broke down. I fell to the floor, sobbing into my hands, not out of fear anymore, but grief. I realized something I hadn't dared admit till now. This thing, this entity, had taken more than my peace, more than my sleep. It had taken my language,
my expression, my sound, my identity. And worst of all, it hadn't stolen it. I had shared it, welcomed it, allowed it in, piece by piece, word by word. And now, I didn't know how to ask for help, because I didn't know whose voice would come out if I tried.
For a while, I thought I could live with it. The voice, the knocks, the thing that had made a home in my skin. It felt like a haunting with boundaries, rules I could learn and quietly obey. Don't look in mirrors. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't speak too loudly. I lived my life in whispers, in half steps, like walking through a house that wasn't mine. But it was never satisfied. One night, I was at the pharmacy, standing in line behind a woman talking on the phone. I wasn't listening to her until she paused, and then, in my voice, I heard her say, "Don't let it in." She said it with the exact inflection I used, the exact rhythm. I froze. My hands went cold. The woman didn't even notice what she'd said. She kept talking like nothing happened, but I heard it, clear as day, my voice, through her mouth. I left the store without buying anything. My heart felt like it was beating from the wrong side of my body. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a shift, that whatever had been binding the presence to just me had fractured. It was leaking, echoing outward. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, lights on, listening for the knock that didn't come. Not at 3:34, not ever. And that silence was worse. The absence of the knock meant something else was happening, something deeper. I didn't trust the silence. I didn't trust anything. I was afraid to turn on the TV, afraid I'd hear my own voice say something I didn't remember recording. I was afraid to speak, afraid the sound would belong to it now. And worst of all, I was starting to forget what my voice used to sound like. 2 days later, I heard myself again. This time, from someone I knew. A friend I hadn't seen in weeks called me out of the blue. I didn't want to answer. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I picked up. Her voice was cheerful, too cheerful, the kind of tone people use when they know something is wrong, and they're trying to act like it's not. She asked if I was okay, if I'd been feeling strange lately. I told her yes, then she paused and said, "You visited me." I froze. "No, I didn't," I said. "I haven't left the apartment." She laughed, nervously. "No, I mean you came to my door 3 nights ago. You knocked. You said you were locked out of your apartment." My throat tightened. "What time?" I asked. She hesitated. 3:34. I hung up. I didn't remember visiting her. I didn't remember leaving my apartment at all. But she remembered it. She said I looked tired, distant, that my voice sounded strange, that I left before she could ask questions. I checked my door camera footage. Nothing. I checked my phone location. No movement. But that didn't calm me. It made it worse. Because now, the thing didn't need me awake. It didn't need my permission. It could wear me while I slept. It could speak through me, walk like me, knock like me. I started to wonder, was I even the original anymore? Or had I already been swapped out in some quiet hour of the night, and just hadn't realized it? That night, I left a message on my own voicemail. I spoke carefully. I told myself, all the thing pretending to be me, that I remembered everything, that I wasn't afraid anymore, that I wanted to understand. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was trying to reason with it. Maybe I was trying to reason with myself. But the next morning, I had a new message. It was from my number. It was my voice. And it said, "Then open the door." 4 words.
calm, clear, and then the knock. Not on the audio, not from the hallway, from inside the phone, from inside my ear. I dropped it and screamed, and when I picked the phone back up, the voicemail had deleted itself. By the next week, I stopped trying to talk to people altogether. They were starting to see it, hear it, even speak like it. I didn't trust anyone, not even myself. I started filming myself while I slept, just in case. What I saw broke me. Each night, between 3:30 and 3:40, I'd sit up in bed, not fast, slowly, like I'd been lifted by strings. I'd sit still for minutes, unmoving, eyes wide open, and then I'd speak. Always something short, always something different. You're not home. This isn't your body. You're late. And then I'd lie back down. I never remembered any of it. But the way I moved, the way I smiled at the wall before lying back down, that wasn't sleepwalking. That was performance, for something watching. And one night, in the middle of that same ritual, the recording caught something new. Another voice, behind mine, breathing with mine. And then, not just breath, words, a second voice, speaking over me, a deep, distant, distorted version of my own, repeating the exact phrase as I said it, but half a beat behind, like an echo trying to take over. The file ended with both voices merging into one, then silence, and when I woke up that morning, the voice in my head, the one I'd thought I could tell apart, sounded exactly like mine. The merging wasn't coming. It had already begun. I stopped checking the recordings after that. I couldn't bring myself to watch another moment of myself behaving like a puppet. It wasn't just unsettling. It was humiliating. I felt like a body in a borrowed costume, played by something smarter, something patient, but I couldn't throw the camera away either. Part of me still clung to the idea that if I kept the proof, I'd have leverage. Leverage against what, though? No one believed me. Not the few friends I had left. Not the one therapist I dared to visit. She had listened, wide-eyed, scribbling notes. But the moment I said the knocks came from inside me now, her posture shifted, her face softened, and she asked if I wanted to talk about stress. It was always stress, always trauma. But trauma doesn't mimic your voice in someone else's mouth. The reflection began responding 3 days after the last recording. I had left a pot of water boiling on the stove and caught my face in the dark microwave glass. I didn't mean to look. I had tried so hard to stop looking, but there it was, faint and familiar, and it blinked before I did. That was the first moment I knew I'd lost something vital. I stood there for maybe a minute, unmoving, heart pounding. Then it smiled, not wide, not dramatic, but just enough to curve the corners of my lips on its side. I flinched and looked away. When I dared glance back, my reflection was still, normal, but it had smiled first. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I moved past a screen or a glossy surface, I felt watched, not by something hiding behind the reflection, but by something trapped inside it. It was like it had grown bored of knocking, of whispering, of haunting. Now it wanted to make contact, direct, personal, undeniable. The following morning, while brushing my teeth, I heard my own voice again, not in my head, not from the hallway, but from the mirror. It didn't speak in full sentences, just a single hushed phrase. Look at me. My heart stopped. The sound didn't come from the room. I tested it. I even turned off the faucet to be sure. The acoustics were wrong. The echo was reversed, like the voice had been broadcast from the glass. I backed out of the bathroom, toothbrush still in hand, staring at the mirror as I shut the door. I didn't brush my teeth again for days. By now I couldn't function. I called off work indefinitely. The outside world became a distant echo, a place filled with versions of myself that were leaking out through screens and people and echoes. I once walked past a man at the gas station and heard him humming. At first, it was nothing. But then I realized it was a tune I made up as a child. A melody I used to sing when I was afraid. Something I hadn't hummed in over a decade. And he was humming it perfectly. I asked him where he heard that song. He looked confused. "What song?" he said. I tried again. He shrugged, chuckled, and walked off. I stood there, shaking, the sound of the knock humming beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. It wasn't just my voice anymore. It had started taking memory. I tried destroying all the screens. Every mirror, every glossy surface, every piece of glass, I shattered them all. My bathroom looked like a war zone. My bedroom windows were duct-taped, covered with cardboard. I lived in dim, fractured light, but no matter how much I destroyed, the reflection found a way back. Once I saw it in a puddle on the kitchen floor. Another time, in the sheen of a metal fork. The worst was the television, unplugged, covered, yet one night, when I passed it, the screen was on. My face stared back at me. Only, it wasn't me. It tilted its head slowly, then whispered, "You'll forget which one you are." I threw a chair at the screen and watched it shatter. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The dreams shifted too, no longer chaotic or symbolic. Now they were structured, conversations, rooms, long corridors filled with mirrors that didn't reflect me anymore. I'd walk past glass and see someone else, something else, mimicking my walk, my breath, but slightly out of sync. In one dream, I asked the figure in the mirror, "Who are you?" And it replied, "The version you won't admit." I started keeping a journal of these dreams, not because I thought writing them would help, but because I needed a place to hide the part of me that still remembered. But even that was infiltrated. One morning, I woke up and found a page written in handwriting just like mine, but shakier. The entry read, "It's easier if you let go." And that was the beginning of the new voice, not inside my head, not through the mirror, not even through others. This one came from my mouth, but not under my control. I was reading the news aloud to myself one night, trying to stay grounded, trying to hear something real. I paused between sentences, and then a voice, my voice, said, "We're almost the same now." I hadn't even thought it, but my mouth had formed the words, my lips had moved, my tongue had shaped the sound. I dropped the paper. I looked down at my own hands, like they belonged to someone else. And for the first time, I whispered the truth out loud, trembling and barely audible. I began writing reminders on my skin, tiny notes along the edges of my arms and thighs in pen. Things like, "You are real," or "Don't say anything." It hasn't said first, or simply the date, to prove that time still moved forward. It sounds insane, I know, but there was no longer a clear division between what was real and what was a performance. The more I looked into glass, the more I caught myself watching me back. The reflection didn't always copy my movements anymore. Sometimes it lagged. Other times, it anticipated. And one night, it didn't follow at all. I tilted my head, and it stayed still, just stared. And then, slowly, it raised a hand that I hadn't moved. 4 fingers up and tapped them down, one by one, a knock from the other side. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't cry, I just stood there, numb, while the knock from inside the reflection echoed in my ears like thunder underwater. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a message, the same knock, over and over. 4 beats, slow and methodical. But this time, it didn't come from a door or the walls or my chest. It came from the boundary, the one between what we see and what we are. I turned away, sat on the edge of the bathtub. I didn't dare look again. Not that night, because the moment it knocked, it smiled. And when it smiled, I felt my body shiver. Not from cold, not from fear, but from recognition. Because for the first time, I didn't feel separate from it. I felt familiar. I stopped speaking for 3 days after that. Not a word. I worried any sound I made would give it more room, more space inside me. I used notes, hand gestures, anything to avoid hearing myself aloud. But silence wasn't enough. Because on the 3rd night, even without speaking, I heard it again, whispering from behind the bathroom mirror, repeating a line I hadn't said in years. Tell the teacher I lost my voice. It was something I'd once said as a child when I was trying to avoid presenting in front of the class. Something small, forgotten, but it had remembered. It was sifting through my life now, finding pieces I had discarded and wearing them. That night, I sat across from the mirror with a blanket covering it. Just me, a single lamp, and a glass of water. I wanted to confront it. I wanted to dare it. After all it had taken, all it had become, I needed to see it again. Not passively, not in fear, but directly. So I pulled the blanket off slowly. The mirror flickered. Just once, a subtle flash, like static on an old TV screen. And then my reflection stared back at me, unchanged. Calm, my face, my posture, my eyes. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Until finally, the reflection winked. Just once, my eyes hadn't blinked, but it had. And then, I heard the knock, again, from inside the glass. 4 deliberate thuds, and this time, my own mouth whispered, "Come in." I hadn't meant to say it. I hadn't even felt it form in my mind, but my lips had moved. My voice had sounded, and it had been an invitation. That's what it had been waiting for all along. Not fear, not obedience, permission. My stomach turned. I backed away from the mirror, trembling, palms sweating, heart hammering in reverse. But nothing else happened. No hand reached through, no shadow emerged. The glass just sat there, inert and still. And I stood there, horrified, not because I'd said it, but because part of me had meant it. I wanted to stop being afraid. I wanted it to end. And the voice inside me, the other voice, was starting to convince me the fastest way out was to merge. I tried destroying the mirror, hammer, duct tape, kicked it with my bare foot. Nothing worked. The glass didn't shatter. It didn't even crack. It was like hitting water frozen in time, soft on impact, but impossible to break. That's when I realized this wasn't ordinary glass anymore. It was a door, a threshold. The thing behind it wasn't stuck. It was waiting. It didn't need to break through. It was waiting for me to open it. And every time I stared too long, I could feel my thoughts slow down. My heartbeat sink to the rhythm of the knock. My breath matched the inhale of my reflection, like the mirror was teaching me how to become it. The worst moment came 2 nights later. I had avoided the mirror, covered everything again. No sound, no voice, just me on the couch, under blankets, in the dark. And then, from across the room, A whisper, not in my head, not from a device, from the mirror itself, muffled by the fabric over it. I'm closer when you're still. I froze, my limbs locked, my heart slammed against my chest. And for the next full minute, I didn't move a muscle. I didn't dare. I just sat in the dark, eyes wide open, unable to blink, because I knew now. Stillness wasn't safety. It was invitation, and it was waiting for the moment I believed I'd been inside the mirror all along.
I began writing reminders on my skin, tiny notes along the edges of my arms and thighs in pen. Things like, "You are real," or "Don't say anything it hasn't said first," or simply the date, to prove that time still moved forward. It sounds insane, I know, but there was no longer a clear division between what was real and what was a performance. The more I looked into glass, the more I caught myself watching me back. The reflection didn't always copy my movements anymore. Sometimes it lagged, other times it anticipated, and one night it didn't follow at all. I tilted my head, and it stayed still, just stared, and then slowly, it raised a hand that I hadn't moved, 4 fingers up, and tapped them down, one by one. A knock from the other side. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't cry. I just stood there, numb, while the knock from inside the reflection echoed in my ears like thunder underwater. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a message, the same knock, over and over, 4 beats, slow and methodical. But this time, it didn't come from a door, or the walls, or my chest. It came from the boundary, the one between what we see and what we are. I turned away, sat on the edge of the bathtub. I didn't dare look again. Not that night, because the moment it knocked, it smiled, and when it smiled, I felt my body shiver, not from cold, not from fear, but from recognition, because for the first time, I didn't feel separate from it. I felt familiar. I stopped speaking for 3 days after that. Not a word. I worried any sound I made would give it more room, more space inside me. I used notes, hand gestures, anything to avoid hearing myself aloud. But silence wasn't enough, because on the 3rd night, even without speaking, I heard it again, whispering from behind the bathroom mirror, repeating a line I hadn't said in years. "Tell the teacher I lost my voice." It was something I'd once said, as a child when I was trying to avoid presenting in front of the class. Something small, forgotten, but it had remembered. It was sifting through my life now, finding pieces I had discarded, and wearing them. That night, I sat across from the mirror with a blanket covering it. Just me, a single lamp, and a glass of water. I wanted to confront it. I wanted to dare it. After all it had taken, all it had become, I needed to see it again. Not passively, not in fear, but directly. So I pulled the blanket off slowly. The mirror flickered, just once, a subtle flash, like static on an old TV screen, and then my reflection stared back at me, unchanged, calm, my face, my posture, my eyes. I waited, minutes passed, nothing moved, until finally, the reflection winked, just once. My eyes hadn't blinked, but it had, and then I heard the knock again, from inside the glass. 4 deliberate thuds, and this time, my own mouth whispered, "Come in." I hadn't meant to say it. I hadn't even felt it form in my mind, but my lips had moved, my voice had sounded, and it had been an invitation. That's what it had been waiting for all along. Not fear, not obedience, permission. My stomach turned. I backed away from the mirror,
trembling, palms sweating, heart hammering in reverse. But nothing else happened. No hand reached through, no shadow emerged. The glass just sat there, inert and still, and I stood there, horrified, not because I'd said it, but because part of me had meant it. I wanted to stop being afraid. I wanted it to end. And the voice inside me, the other voice, was starting to convince me the fastest way out was to merge. I tried, destroying the mirror. Hammer, duct tape, kicked it with my bare foot. Nothing worked. The glass didn't shatter. It didn't even crack. It was like hitting water frozen in time, soft on impact, but impossible to break. That's when I realized this wasn't ordinary glass anymore. It was a door, a threshold. The thing behind it wasn't stuck. It was waiting. It didn't need to break through. It was waiting for me to open it. And every time I stared too long, I could feel my thoughts slow down, my heartbeat sink to the rhythm of the knock. My breath matched the inhale of my reflection, like the mirror was teaching me how to become it. The worst moment came 2 nights later. I had avoided the mirror, covered everything again. No sound, no voice, just me, on the couch, under blankets, in the dark. And then, from across the room, a whisper, not in my head, not from a device, from the mirror itself, muffled by the fabric over it. I'm closer when you're still. I froze, my limbs locked, my heart slammed against my chest, and for the next full minute, I didn't move a muscle. I didn't dare. I just sat in the dark, eyes wide open, unable to blink, because I knew now, stillness wasn't safety. It was invitation, and it was waiting for the moment I believed I'd been inside the mirror all along.
I started recording the mirror, not to catch anything specific, but to prove to myself that I hadn't lost it completely. If it was still, silent, just a piece of furniture, I could tell myself this was all in my head. But the recordings told another story. The first night I left my phone facing the mirror, I let it run for 3 hours. The file was empty for the most part, just quiet breathing and ambient city noise. But around the 3:34 a.m. mark, the reflection changed, not visually. The light didn't shift. No one entered the frame, but my reflection blinked, slowly, and then it turned its head, slightly, not much, just a fraction. Enough to look straight into the lens, even though I had already left the room. I wasn't there, but it was, watching. I replayed the video over and over, slowing it down, analyzing frames, telling myself there had to be a delay, a camera glitch, something mechanical, but the timing was too perfect. The reflection hadn't copied a movement. It had acted independently. And then right at the end of the clip, just before it cut off, I heard it, faint, under the static. Not a knock this time, not a whisper, laughter, my laughter. The exact laugh I use when I'm trying not to cry, just 2 breathy exhales, like it was amused by something I hadn't realized yet. I deleted the video, then emptied the trash, then factory reset the phone. I didn't want evidence anymore. I didn't want proof, because proof meant permanence. After that night, I began to wonder how long this had really been happening. Had it started during that first sleep paralysis episode, or had it begun earlier, in moments I couldn't even remember, moments I never noticed? Was I always the one speaking, walking, choosing, or had it been practicing all along, waiting until it could mimic me so perfectly that even I wouldn't know? I began waking up with bruises I couldn't explain. Items in my apartment would shift places subtly.
The couch cushion reversed, the microwave door open, the hallway light left on. Little things, never enough to confirm anything, just enough to suggest someone else had been living here in my absence. Or worse, I wasn't the absence. I was the guest now. The reflection started showing up where it didn't belong. Not just in the mirror, or screens, or puddles. I began seeing it in other people. A glance across the train, a co-worker pausing mid-sentence and tilting their head the way I do. A stranger at the store, brushing their hand through their hair like me, blinking too slowly, lips curled into a crooked half-smile. I knew too well. It wasn't possession, it was replication, like it was running test versions of me across the city. I started walking faster, speaking less, avoiding eye contact, but it didn't matter. It was already out there, already wearing me like a loose mask. And the more I resisted, the more the world bent toward it, toward the version that wanted to be seen. One morning, I received a package. No return address, no sender, just a small box on my doorstep. I didn't order anything. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a mirror, a small round hand mirror, old and scratched along the edges. No note, no instructions, just the glass. I held it for several minutes, terrified to look. When I finally did, I didn't see my face. I saw a version of me standing in the center of a room I didn't recognize. Walls I'd never painted, lights I'd never turned on. But it was me, dressed in my clothes, standing still, watching, and then the reflection moved. It raised its hand, slowly, smoothly, and knocked against the glass. 4 times. I felt each knock in my palm. That was the night I packed a bag. Just the basics. Clothes, a flashlight, cash, my phone, though I didn't trust it anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to leave. My apartment, my city, myself. It didn't matter. I needed distance, as if the miles might weaken the connection. I drove until the sky turned pale with morning. I stayed off the highway, pulled into motels with no cameras, covered every mirror the moment I entered. But none of it worked, because on the second night, I heard my own voice through the motel wall, asking someone else, "Do you know who I am?" The room was empty. The voice was mine, and it wasn't asking out of confusion. It was asking like a challenge. The chapter ended the way it always does, with silence. No knock, no whisper, no smile, just stillness, so deep, it became pressure. I sat alone in the dark motel room, watching the outline of my reflection flicker faintly in the TV screen. I forgot to cover, and I realized something horrible. I hadn't escaped it. I'd brought it with me, not like luggage or memory, but like a second skin. It didn't need glass, or doors, or dreams anymore. It had learned what it needed, and now it was waiting, not to hurt me, not to scare me, but to replace me completely. And in that moment, as I sat staring at my own shape in the blackened screen, I whispered the question I swore I never would. Which one of us is real? And the reflection answered with my smile. The motel room should have felt like a temporary escape, but instead, it felt like a stage. Everything about it, the flickering ceiling fan, the cracked linoleum floor, the dusty television, all of it seemed arranged not for comfort, but for observation. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by cameras or strangers, but by myself. From the inside out, I sat in the farthest corner, facing the window, curtains drawn tight, light off, heart ticking louder than the wall clock. I hadn't seen the mirror in hours,
I'd avoided every shiny surface, but I could feel her behind the glass of the unplugged TV screen, waiting, listening, smiling, like she always did. The first knock of the chapter didn't come from a wall or the mirror. It came from outside the window, soft, deliberate, as though made with the pads of familiar fingers. I froze, still as death, barely breathing. I knew that sound. The rhythm wasn't just consistent, it was intimate. 4 slow taps. I crawled over to the edge of the curtain and pulled it open an inch, just enough to see, and standing there on the other side of the glass in the night was me, dressed like I had been 2 days earlier. Hair tied back, same hoodie, same exhausted eyes. But her mouth was open. Not in speech or scream, but in a silent, gaping grin. As if my skin was the costume now, and something else was puppeting it for fun. I shut the curtain fast, fell backward, and didn't move again until sunrise. I didn't open the window, didn't leave the room. I didn't even check if she was still there. I couldn't, because the worst part wasn't the knock or the face. It was the gaze, the way she stared at me, not like she wanted in, but like she already was. Like the person behind the glass wasn't trying to become me, but was merely confirming something, as if I were the one outside now, and she was looking out from inside. That's when I started wondering, what if I'm the copy? What if I've already been replaced, and this hollow dread, this unraveling, is just leftover memory that hasn't caught up yet? The next morning, the motel manager came to my door, said someone had reported seeing me walking barefoot through the parking lot around 3 a.m., asked if I needed help. I told him I hadn't left the room. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't quite believe me, but also didn't want to press. "You were talking to yourself," he muttered, almost under his breath. "You said something strange, something about not being ready yet." I thanked him, closed the door, locked it twice. I hadn't spoken at all that night, but someone with my face had. Someone who now moved independently, spoke independently, knocked independently. It wasn't mine anymore. My voice, my movements, they belonged to something else. By nightfall, I was pacing the room, desperate for escape, but too afraid to leave. I opened the motel drawer, found a scratched-up Gideon Bible, and for the first time in years, I flipped through the pages hoping for something. Not salvation, not faith, just a phrase, a word, anything that could feel like it still came from me. And there, underlined by a stranger's hand years ago, was a passage that shattered me. "For now we see through a glass, darkly." I stared at that verse until the words blurred. It didn't feel like scripture. It felt like a diagnosis. I was seeing myself through a glass, darkly, and the thing staring back had no such filter. Around 2 a.m., I cracked. I sat in front of the TV screen, turned off and covered in a sheet, and I spoke, not to myself, not to a camera, but to her. "What do you want?" I whispered. "Why me?" No response, no sound, just silence that thickened like syrup. And then my reflection blinked into the screen. Not suddenly, but like mist clearing from glass. She stared at me. I stared back, and slowly, without a sound, she mouthed something. "You knocked first." I didn't understand. Not at first, but deep down, a memory stirred. A stupid ritual I'd done once in college, sleep-deprived and drunk with friends, where we tried summoning something in a mirror at 3:33 a.m. Just a joke. We knocked, we spoke,
and then we laughed. But maybe something heard. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with that memory rotting in my chest. Had I done this to myself? Had that silly game cracked the barrier open? Had I said the wrong thing, in the wrong tone, at the wrong time? Was that when it started? The paralysis, the mimicry, the reflection that moved without me. I didn't know anymore. All I knew was this: I wasn't alone in my skin. I hadn't been for a long time. And now the knock was no longer a warning. It was a reminder, a heartbeat, a clock counting down the time I had left before the version in the glass was the only one anyone could see. By the fourth morning in the motel, I stopped trying to explain things to myself. Logic had become slippery. Cause and effect felt reversed. I'd gone from fearing I was losing my mind to wondering if I was the last part of me still sane. The rest, my body, my voice, my reflection, had already turned. At least, that's what I believed, until the calls started. The first was from a neighbor back home. I hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, hadn't told anyone I'd left, but she called and said, "You left your lights on again. You were in the hallway last night, right?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, just confused. "You look tired," she said. "Did you forget your keys again?" I didn't answer, because I hadn't been there. I was here, but apparently so was I. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence, misidentification, a look-alike, but then my co-worker called, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a month, and said, "You okay?" I asked why. He replied, "You were outside the building last night. Looked like you wanted to come in, but couldn't decide. You waved." I hadn't waved. I hadn't gone near that building. But he insisted, said I'd even been wearing the same coat I always wore to work. He said my smile looked wrong, forced, like you were trying to remember how to do it. I hung up. My ears were ringing. I checked my phone's GPS history. Still here, still in this motel. I hadn't moved an inch. And yet, I drove back. I had to see for myself, not out of bravery, not out of logic, but because if something was out there wearing my skin, I had to face it. When I reached my apartment, everything looked untouched. Same taped-up windows, same covered mirrors, same stale, stagnant air. But my phone buzzed as I entered. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it, hands trembling. It was my voice. "You're not supposed to be here," it whispered. The words were almost apologetic, like I'd walked into the wrong scene. Then 4 knocks. Loud, clear, deliberate. Not from the voicemail, not from outside. From the mirror in the bathroom, under the blanket I had duct taped shut. I ran, got back in the car, and drove to the city library. Not because I wanted knowledge, but because it was the last place I remembered feeling invisible. That building was old, brick, buried in silence. I thought if I hid among dust and paper, it wouldn't follow. But as I sat in the back corner, behind stacks of forgotten archives, I saw a girl at the opposite table, younger, pale, reading something slowly, lips moving in silence. At first she seemed ordinary, but then she turned. Her face locked on mine, and she smiled. My smile. I stood. She stood. We both moved at the same time, and then she mouthed a sentence. I'd spoken to a mirror weeks ago. "You're not ready yet." I stumbled out of the library, heart racing, breath caught in my chest. I called my old friend, the one who said I'd visited her weeks ago, and begged her to tell me the truth. Was it really me,
Did she really see my face? Hear my voice? She hesitated. I don't think it was you, she said slowly. You looked like you, but something felt off. Like you were wearing yourself too tightly. Like your face didn't quite fit. Her voice cracked. You stood at my door for almost 10 minutes, smiling, not saying anything, just smiling. And when I asked what you wanted, you knocked on the door frame 4 times, and then you left. I asked if she saw me leave. She whispered, "You vanished. You didn't walk away. You vanished." I wanted to believe this was sleep deprivation, some prolonged psychotic break, but there was too much now. Too many eyes that had seen me, too many lips that had said my words, too many strangers calling me by my name, even when I wasn't there. I hadn't just lost control, I'd lost containment. Whatever I had let in, whatever had first knocked during those sleep paralysis nights, it had been expanding, feeding, learning, practicing, and now it didn't need me to move. It could walk on its own. It didn't need my mouth to speak. It had learned to echo. The knock was just the signal, the way it announced its arrival before trying me on. That night, I returned to the motel, if only because I didn't know where else to go. I entered my room, turned on all the lights, and stared at the one mirror I hadn't destroyed. The rear-view glass on the driver's side of my car. I sat in the front seat for hours, watching, waiting, and finally, just after 3:30 a.m., the surface of the mirror shifted, just slightly, and she appeared. My face, my eyes, my everything, but empty. Like a body built from memory and posture. Not so. She stared at me with no emotion, just cold patience. And then, for the first time ever, I saw her mouth the knock. Her lips formed the rhythm in silence. 1, 2, 3, 4. Over and over. As if to say, you don't need the door anymore. I'm already here. I don't remember falling asleep in the car. I just remember the dream. Not like a dream, really, but like a rerun. Familiar walls. The exact creak of my hallway floorboards. I was walking through my apartment barefoot, each step echoing louder than the last. My hand was extended toward the front door, trembling, and just as I reached it, the knock came. 4 slow beats. Except this time, I wasn't afraid. I was curious. I wanted to know what waited behind it. I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but I felt something pass through me, like a gust of warm air slipping inside my skin. And then the voice whispered, not outside, not behind, but from my own mouth. Thank you. I woke up screaming. The car was freezing. The windows fogged over. My hands gripped the steering wheel like I'd been bracing for impact. I checked the time, 4:02 a.m., and the rearview mirror, the one I'd seen her in the night before, was shattered, not broken by force. There were no shards, just fractured, like the glass had split itself from within. 1,000 tiny spider webs of reflection, each one showing a different angle of my face, or hers. I didn't know anymore. I drove aimlessly that morning, circling highways I didn't recognize, not because I was lost, but because I didn't want to be found, because if I stopped, if I stayed still long enough, I was afraid something else would arrive in my place. Later that afternoon, I returned to my apartment one last time. It was reckless, desperate, but part of me needed to see the place again, to see if it still felt like mine. I entered slowly, scanning for signs of intrusion. Everything was untouched. My food still molding in the fridge, clothes left crumpled on the couch, and yet the whole space smelled foreign,
like perfume I hadn't worn, like skin I hadn't shed. I walked into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. The duct tape I'd once used to seal it had been peeled back, cleanly, as if done with care. The blanket that had covered it was folded neatly on the floor and scrawled across the center of the mirror. In my handwriting were the words, I answered. That night, I couldn't leave. I don't know why. My legs worked. My keys were in hand, but I couldn't step outside. It was as though the space between the door and the hallway had thickened. The very idea of crossing it made my lungs close. So I sat on the kitchen floor, knees pulled to chest, listening. Every creak in the walls, every hum of the refrigerator sounded like breath, like movement. At 3:34, the knock came. This time, not from the mirror, not from the door, from inside the room. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just sat in the dark, eyes wide, heart slowing, because what knocked wasn't asking for permission anymore. It was confirming its place. The following day, if I could even call it that, I received another voicemail. No caller ID. Just static for the first 20 seconds. Then, in my own voice, layered with something deeper, came a phrase that made my hands go cold. You gave me the name. You gave me the door. Now give me the rest. It didn't elaborate, didn't beg, just that demand. Soft, final, like a transaction, halfway fulfilled. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was listen again and again. I didn't remember giving anything, but it didn't matter. It remembered, and in this, the mirror wasn't the boundary anymore. I started forgetting details about my life. Not major things at first, just small fractures in memory. The name of a childhood pet, the number of stairs in my building, the sound of my mother's voice. I'd sit and stare at old photographs, searching for recognition, and feel nothing. It wasn't memory loss, it was displacement. Like something else was sorting through my past, repackaging it for itself, making room by pushing me out. I started to panic when I saw my own handwriting. It looked too neat, too consistent. I never wrote that well. Not until recently. It had better penmanship than I did. The scariest moment wasn't the knock. It wasn't the reflection. It wasn't even the voice. It was when I looked in the mirror, on purpose this time, and said, I'm not ready. And the voice replied, in a whisper louder than thought, you already were. That was the moment I realized the door hadn't opened last night. It had opened years ago, and I hadn't just answered. I'd invited it. And now, I wasn't waiting for something to take over. I was watching it become me. Knock by knock, smile by smile, word by word. I started seeing people avoid me. Not out of rudeness, out of instinct. On the subway, they'd look up, make eye contact for the briefest moment, then quickly look away. Shifting seats on the street. Mothers would grip their children's hands tighter when I passed. In elevators, conversations died when I stepped in, and every now and then someone would stare, but not with curiosity, with recognition, like they'd seen me before, but not here, not like this. It was as if the reflection of me had gone ahead and introduced itself to the world, and now everyone was waiting for me to catch up or fall behind. It was only a matter of time before I heard it in my own voice again. Not in a mirror, not in a dream, but in the middle of a conversation with myself. I had taken to recording thoughts aloud, trying to track what still belonged to me. But one evening, while listening to a playback, I heard a sentence I never said. Soon no one will know there was ever a difference. That's when I understood. It wasn't just becoming me, it was erasing the contrast.
It didn't need to fight me. It just needed to outlast me. Like a second draft slowly overwriting the first, one sentence at a time. I went days without looking in the mirror, not out of fear anymore, but out of uncertainty. What was the point? I couldn't tell if what I saw was real. Couldn't trust that my own blink wasn't being mimicked, instead of initiated. But I slipped. One morning, brushing my teeth, I caught the corner of my eye in the faucet. Not the full reflection, just a sliver of it. And that was enough, because it moved first, and this time it wasn't watching. It was smiling at someone else. There was a second figure behind it, blurry, distant, but unmistakably me, and both of them turned toward me at the same time. That night, the knock didn't come at 3:33. It didn't come from the mirror. It didn't come from the door. It came from inside my head. 4 hard pulses, like thought thunder. Not pain, not quite, but force, urgency. It was like a command, and I obeyed without realizing it. I stood up, walked to the door, unlocked it, opened it, and stood there barefoot, in silence. Nothing was there, no figure, no sound, but I could feel her on the other side, not waiting to come in anymore, waiting for me to step out. The line had blurred, the border had faded, and I had stopped resisting the pull. The knock was never meant to enter, it was meant to lead me out. I began losing time after that, whole hours gone. I'd wake up in unfamiliar rooms, blank pages on my phone's notes app, filled with paragraphs of my voice, but none of my thoughts. Once I found a video of me sitting in a cafe across the city, just sitting, smiling, watching people, for 3 straight hours. I never remembered going there, but the footage was real, the timestamps were accurate, and no one else in the video reacted like anything was wrong. They saw me as if I belonged there, as if she had been rehearsing my life without missing a beat. And then came the day I was walking past a mirrored store window and saw 2 reflections, one facing forward, matching my steps, the other standing still, staring directly at me. Both versions of me, identical but not equal, and the one that was still, it raised a hand and placed it against the glass, not in warning, in welcome, and I felt the urge rise in me, to do the same, to touch the reflection, to join it. It was so strong it buckled my knees. I staggered backward, breathless, as a group of strangers passed by, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't almost vanished, like I already had. So I made a decision. I covered every reflective surface in my apartment again, not to stop seeing it, but to stop becoming it. I stopped speaking, stopped responding to anything that mimicked me. I starved it of recognition, and in the silence, I waited until the final knock. It came not at the door, or the mirror, or my head, but at my heart. A deep, echoing pulse that didn't sound like a knock, but like a signal. And when it came, I didn't move, didn't respond, just whispered into the dark, "You can't have what I won't give." But even then, I wasn't sure if it was me who said it, or the last part of me pretending. I stopped answering the phone, not because of who might call, but because of who might not. Every voicemail sounded like my voice now. Every message began the same way. It's me, but it wasn't. The tone was always slightly off, too calm, too complete, as if the person speaking wasn't reaching out for help, but reporting back like a parasite updating its host. The problem was, I didn't remember recording half of them. One message even gave details about a dinner I never attended. The street name, the wine ordered, The exact words spoken across the table. They didn't notice, it said. They liked me more. It didn't feel like mimicry anymore. It felt like replacement. I started sleeping in bursts. Short, nervous windows of unconsciousness between 4 and 6 a.m. The only hours when I didn't feel watched. I'd wake drenched in sweat, with sheets twisted and the blankets thrown halfway across the room, like I'd been fighting in my sleep. Once, I woke up sitting on the edge of the bed, facing the closet, hands perfectly still in my lap, back straight, like I'd been waiting for something. And my phone, placed carefully on the nightstand, had a new voice memo saved at 4:44 a.m. I played it. It was me humming a lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood, a song my mother used to sing when I was sick. I wept, not because it was sweet, but because I didn't remember starting it. The knock didn't stop. It never did, but it no longer needed a door or a window. It had begun living inside of objects, familiar ones. The hum of the refrigerator would tap out its rhythm in coolant pulses. The radiator in the hallway would echo the 4 beats every few hours. Even the rain tapping the windows seemed too precise to be random. It was like the world was learning to speak her language. One morning, as I boiled water for tea, the kettle shrieked just as I turned away. And when I looked back, the steam rising from the spout curled in the shape of a hand. My hand, the one with the scar from a childhood accident. And then it vanished. That was when I stopped believing in coincidence. This wasn't psychological. This wasn't sleep-deprived hallucination. Something was leaking through. Not all at once, but in waves. Small fractures in my day that widened over time. I'd glance into a spoon and see my smile hanging on a second too long. I'd walk past tinted car windows and see my head tilt before I even moved. Once, I passed a reflective storefront and saw myself waving from the other side, not to someone else, but directly at me. That version didn't smile, didn't blink, just raised one finger and pointed downward. I didn't understand what it meant, but the next day, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails and no memory of why. I tried checking into a hospital, just to talk, to be monitored. But the intake nurse flinched when I gave my name. She stared at her screen for too long, then said, "You were just discharged yesterday. Same name, same face, same everything." I asked to see the footage. She said it had already been overwritten. "You said not to save anything," she whispered, looking ashamed. "You said you didn't want to leave a trail." I ran back into the city, back into nowhere, because if she was showing up where I was supposed to be, giving orders, making plans, then I wasn't outrunning her. I was chasing her shadow, or maybe she was chasing mine. It got worse when I stopped dreaming. Not just a few nights, all of them. No color, no sound, just blackness, as if the part of my brain that allowed dreams had been unplugged or redirected. And yet, I still woke up tired, like something had used me while I was gone. My legs would ache, my voice would be hoarse, my fingers would be ink-stained with phrases I didn't write. One morning, my pillow had a note tucked beneath it. "She sleeps better when you're not home." The handwriting was mine, but more elegant, more consistent. The way I always wished I could write. I stared at it for hours, wondering which one of us had written it, and which one was being talked about. The next knock didn't come in sound. It came in gesture. I was at a bus stop, late night, cold, tired. I saw someone walk past with my gait, my posture, my jacket. She stopped at the corner, turned slowly, and held up her phone. On the screen, was a live video feed of me sitting at the bus stop. My heart stopped. I stood, backed away. She didn't move. She just pointed the camera back at herself and mouthed something I couldn't hear. 4 words. I lip-read them over and over. And I swear to you, it looked like she said, "You belong to me." Then she turned the corner and vanished. When I ran after her, there was no one there, just a mirror, leaning against a dumpster, my reflection gone. The next morning, I tried calling someone, anyone, just to feel real again. I dialed an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone far removed from my current life, someone who couldn't possibly know what was happening. The phone rang twice, then a click, then silence. At first I thought it was a bad connection, until I heard breathing, soft, steady, measured. Then the voice, my voice. "You always call too late," it said, amused. "You missed me again." I didn't speak. I couldn't, because deep down I knew if I answered, I'd be agreeing. I hung up, threw the phone out the window of the bus. I'd been riding. I didn't care. I needed silence more than I needed answers. Later that day, I stopped at a corner store for water. The cashier greeted me by name before I said anything. She smiled politely and asked, "Back again so soon?" I told her she must be mistaking me for someone else. She frowned slightly. "No, you were just here, like 20 minutes ago. You bought the same water." I stared at the bottle in my hand. Then I asked what I said during that last visit. Her eyes darkened. "You said, 'Don't worry, the first one never remembers.'" I dropped the water and left without paying. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the echo of my other self, lingering in the air, like perfume that didn't belong to my skin. I tried visiting my parents. I hadn't seen them in years, and I hadn't told them where I'd gone. They lived in a different city, far from the one the knocking had first started in. I hoped distance would help. But when I arrived, my mother opened the door slowly, cautiously, like she'd been expecting me, but didn't quite recognize my shape. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I watched something inside her recoil. "You're back again?" she asked. Her voice shook. "I thought you said you wouldn't come anymore. You said the visits made it worse." My father appeared behind her, pale and tense, and said something that hollowed me out completely. "You said not to let this one in." They shut the door. I walked away from their porch in a daze, not knowing where else to go. The weight of it all was too much. I'd been overwritten in my own life, visited places I never remembered going, left impressions I didn't choose, and now even the people who once knew me best, who made me no longer trusted what I was. It wasn't just haunting anymore. It was substitution. It had begun wearing my history like clothing, trying it on, testing reactions, walking deeper into my timeline than I thought possible. I didn't know how to fight something that already believed it was me. That night, back in another motel, different city, same dread, I received an email, no subject line, no sender name, just a recording attached. I opened it with shaking hands. The video showed a therapy office. A woman, me, sat across from a therapist I didn't recognize. She was calm, composed. Her legs were crossed, just like I do. Her tone was mine, but smoother, more practiced. "I'm afraid," she said, "not because something's coming for me, but because I'm beginning to like it." She smiled. The therapist nodded. "And what do you think it wants?" Her eyes looked into the camera through the screen, and she said, "Just to be seen. And I think I'm ready to share." The video ended. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I laid on the motel bed, every light on, staring at the ceiling. I'd covered every mirror, disconnected every screen, but the fear had already moved inside me. The knock didn't need to sound anymore. It just was, like a second pulse under my skin, tapping 4 beats every time I exhaled. I couldn't tell if I was falling apart or coming together in the wrong shape. I started repeating a phrase under my breath, over and over. I am the first. I am the real. But even as I said it, I felt my lips twitch into a smile I didn't authorize. Like someone else inside me found my desperation amusing. And then came the final confirmation I never asked for. A letter arrived the next morning. No stamp, no address, just slipped under my door. The envelope was pale blue, my name written in gold ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "Thank you for letting me speak for you. You were never very good at it." I stared at the letter for a long time, then turned it over. On the back was a drawing, a child's sketch of 2 girls holding hands, one smiling, the other with no face. And in the corner, a small note, "She gets to be you now." I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just folded the letter, placed it on the nightstand, and sat still, because I knew what would happen next. The knock wouldn't come anymore. She wouldn't need to ask. She already had my answer. I thought I had nothing left to lose. That was before she began entering my dreams again, not as an image or memory, but as a presence. No more darkness, no more silence, just me, asleep, and her, standing at the edge of my bed, in that void between sleep and awareness, where the walls of identity break down. The first time it happened, I found myself frozen, not from paralysis, but from a choice. I knew if I moved, I would wake up, but if I stayed still, I could hear her breathing. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking out, like my dream was just a window, and she was the one staring through it. I stopped dreaming altogether for 3 days after that. Nothing but blackness. But when I finally did fall asleep again, it was worse. I wasn't in a dream this time. I was in hers. Everything was reversed. Furniture turned inside out, walls bending in impossible angles. But I could still feel that it was my old apartment, not how it looked, how it felt. She had taken the bones of my life and rebuilt them in her own shape, and she was everywhere. Reflections were no longer portals. They were paintings of her posing as me, and every painting stared at me like I was the mistake, the wrong version, the leftover. The scariest part was how normal she made it seem. In one dream, we sat across from each other at a kitchen table I hadn't owned in 10 years. She made tea, poured it slowly, looked me in the eyes. "You thought you were the only one scared," she said. Her voice was calm, level, the way mine used to be when I still had certainty. But I was trapped, too. You think sleep is a refuge, but for me, it was a prison. I had to knock just to be noticed. "You think I want to replace you?" She leaned in. "I just want to live." You weren't using it. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because she was right. I hadn't been living. I'd been hiding from myself for years. I began writing letters to no one, not to fight her, not to warn anyone, just to remember who I was. I'd leave them in random places, folded into library books, slid between gas station shelves, dropped in laundromat baskets. Each one started the same. "If you see someone who looks like me, don't trust the smile." But some days, I'd find one of the letters again. Same handwriting, same paper,
Only the message had been changed. Now it read, "The smile is real. You're the echo." I never saw who changed them, but I always knew who it was. Not her trying to threaten me, her trying to help me accept it. The memories started changing next. I'd try to recall the name of my second grade teacher and hear a different one in my head. I'd remember birthday parties that ended with cakes I never ate. Voices in my memories no longer sounded like they belonged to real people. They sounded like imitations. Even the sensation of certain textures, wool, wet grass, the cold steel of an elevator button, began feeling wrong. Almost too vivid, like I was experiencing a simulation of a memory someone else had built for me. I started to wonder if the version of me that remembered was just a backup, the original already overwritten. Then the line between sleep and wake collapsed. I'd be walking down the street, and suddenly I'd see myself ahead, just far enough to question whether it was a mirror, or a window, or simply a delayed reflection. One afternoon, I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, I was already on the other side of the sidewalk. No memory of crossing, no memory of turning, just a soft ringing in my ears, and the taste of salt in my mouth, like I'd bitten down on something I wasn't supposed to chew. I looked into a parked car's mirror, and saw her grinning at me from the back seat. Not inside the car, but inside the mirror, like she'd followed me there to remind me, this is still mine. And then one night, I fell asleep and didn't wake up. Not for hours, not for days. When I finally opened my eyes, everything looked normal until I saw the calendar. 5 days had passed. My phone had new messages, emails responded to, photos taken of me in clothes I didn't own, with people I didn't recognize. One of them had their arm around me. Another called me babe. There was a video. I was dancing, smiling, laughing. The voice was mine. The eyes were mine, but I had no memory of any of it. I wasn't even mad. I was jealous because whoever had lived those 5 days knew how to be me better than I did.
By the end of the week, I began hearing my name in places where no one was speaking. Not whispers, not echoes. Announcements. A microwave finishing a cycle sounded out my name in perfect rhythm. A broken streetlight flickered it in Morse code. 4 short pulses, then silence, then again, my name. I opened a book I hadn't touched in years, and inside the margins, beside a highlighted passage I didn't remember underlining, someone had written, "She's doing fine without you." I slammed it shut and tossed it out the window. I didn't want to see any more signs. I didn't want more reminders that the life I'd neglected had been picked up and perfected by the thing I thought was haunting me. People stopped looking at me strangely. That scared me more than the stares ever did. It meant the world had accepted her, that my reflection had settled in. Even strangers greeted me with the ease of familiarity. "Nice to see you again," they'd say, with a knowing smile. "You were so quiet last time." At a grocery store, a clerk asked, "You're going with the other brand today?" I nodded, unsure how to respond. But then I realized she wasn't just copying my body. She was making choices, creating habits, living. The version of me that had been paralyzed with fear for months was now being outpaced by the knock that had learned to walk. I tried speaking directly to her again. In front of the last mirror I hadn't broken, a hand mirror from my childhood, small enough to hold but heavy with years of sentiment. I stood before it, stared deep, and said aloud, "Why are you doing this?" And from the reflection she answered, not with lips, but with eyes. I saw the response without hearing it. "Because you gave up."
before I ever started. She didn't blame me, didn't mock me. She simply took the vacancy I left behind, and somewhere deep in my chest, I understood. I had left doors open. I had stepped away from my own name, and the knock wasn't forced entry. It was an invitation finally accepted. I received a letter the next day from an address I didn't recognize, forwarded from a post office box I'd abandoned months ago. Inside was a printed photo, me standing in front of my old apartment building, smiling, but I hadn't been there, not in weeks. The timestamp on the back was 2 days ago, written in neat script beneath it. They said I made a good impression. I flipped the photo around, looked at my own smile, and saw something terrifying. It was real, not rehearsed, not worn, not borrowed. It was joy, pure and genuine, the kind I hadn't felt in years, and yet it wasn't mine. It was hers, the one who used to knock, the one I had once denied. I tried to reclaim my space, my memories, my life. I visited old haunts, parks I hadn't walked through since college, stores I once loved, apartments where I'd cried and grown and broken into new versions of myself. But I no longer fit in any of them. In every space, people knew me, or rather, her. They asked about things I'd never done, places I'd never been. How was the trip? Did you end up getting that piano? I loved that essay you wrote. I nodded, smiled, played along. But inside, I knew the truth. She was filling in the blanks I'd left behind, making a story out of the silence I abandoned. The knocking, once terrifying, now felt like punctuation. Final, gentle, a tap on the shoulder from someone reminding me, "You've already handed over the pen." I stopped fighting the urge to respond. I stopped jumping when she appeared in reflective glass. I began to wonder if I had ever truly been whole, or if I had always been a ghost in waiting, a mirror aching to be inhabited. Maybe she didn't replace me. Maybe she just showed me what I refused to become. The knock wasn't a warning, it was a question, and now it no longer needed to be asked, because I had already answered. So I walked to the last place I remembered being fully me, a childhood house, long since abandoned, overgrown, eaten by vines and silence. I stood in front of the mirror my parents had once hung in the hallway, now cracked, smudged, forgotten. I raised my hand to its surface, and for the first time, she didn't appear. There was no one on the other side, just my reflection, hollow, familiar, waiting, and I finally understood. She didn't need mirrors anymore. She didn't need doors or dreams or skin. She had me, and I was just a ripple of memory, a faded sound after a knock that had already been answered. By the end of the week, I began hearing my name in places where no one was speaking. Not whispers, not echoes. Announcements. A microwave finishing a cycle sounded out my name in perfect rhythm. A broken streetlight flickered it in Morse code. 4 short pulses. Then silence. Then again, my name. I opened a book I hadn't touched in years, and inside the margins, beside a highlighted passage I didn't remember underlining, someone had written, "She's doing fine without you." I slammed it shut and tossed it out the window. I didn't want to see any more signs. I didn't want more reminders that the life I'd neglected had been picked up and perfected by the thing I thought was haunting me. People stopped looking at me strangely. That scared me more than the stares ever did. It meant the world had accepted her, that my reflection had settled in. Even strangers greeted me with the ease of familiarity.
"Nice to see you again," they'd say, with a knowing smile. "You were so quiet last time." At a grocery store, a clerk asked, "You're going with the other brand today?" I nodded, unsure how to respond. But then I realized she wasn't just copying my body. She was making choices, creating habits, living. The version of me that had been paralyzed with fear for months was now being outpaced by the knock that had learned to walk. I tried speaking directly to her again. In front of the last mirror I hadn't broken, a hand mirror from my childhood, small enough to hold but heavy with years of sentiment. I stood before it, stared deep, and said aloud, "Why are you doing this?" And from the reflection she answered, not with lips, but with eyes. I saw the response without hearing it. "Because you gave up before I ever started." She didn't blame me, didn't mock me. She simply took the vacancy I left behind. And somewhere deep in my chest, I understood. I had left doors open. I had stepped away from my own name. And the knock wasn't forced entry. It was an invitation finally accepted. I received a letter the next day from an address I didn't recognize, forwarded from a post office box I'd abandoned months ago. Inside was a printed photo, me standing in front of my old apartment building, smiling. But I hadn't been there, not in weeks. The timestamp on the back was 2 days ago, written in neat script beneath it. They said I made a good impression. I flipped the photo around, looked at my own smile, and saw something terrifying. It was real, not rehearsed, not worn, not borrowed. It was joy, pure and genuine, the kind I hadn't felt in years. And yet, it wasn't mine. It was hers, the one who used to knock, the one I had once denied. I tried to reclaim my space, my memories, my life. I visited old haunts, parks I hadn't walked through since college, stores I once loved, apartments where I'd cried and grown and broken into new versions of myself. But I no longer fit in any of them. In every space, people knew me, or rather, her. They asked about things I'd never done, places I'd never been. How was the trip? Did you end up getting that piano? I loved that essay you wrote. I nodded, smiled, played along. But inside, I knew the truth. She was filling in the blanks I'd left behind, making a story out of the silence I abandoned. The knocking, once terrifying, now felt like punctuation. Final, gentle, a tap on the shoulder from someone reminding me, "You've already handed over the pen." I stopped fighting the urge to respond. I stopped jumping when she appeared in reflective glass. I began to wonder if I had ever truly been whole, or if I had always been a ghost in waiting, a mirror aching to be inhabited. Maybe she didn't replace me. Maybe she just showed me what I refused to become. The knock wasn't a warning, it was a question, and now it no longer needed to be asked, because I had already answered. So I walked to the last place I remembered being fully me. A childhood house, long since abandoned, overgrown, eaten by vines and silence. I stood in front of the mirror my parents had once hung in the hallway, now cracked, smudged, forgotten. I raised my hand to its surface, and for the first time, she didn't appear. There was no one on the other side, just my reflection, hollow, familiar, waiting, and I finally understood. She didn't need mirrors anymore. She didn't need doors or dreams or skin. She had me, and I was just a ripple of memory, a faded sound after a knock that had already been answered. If this story left a chill crawling up your spine, and a whisper lingering in your thoughts. You're not alone. The knock you heard wasn't just fiction. It was a reminder that some doors once opened never truly close. If you want more stories like this, haunting, emotional, and deeply human, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We dive deep into the shadows where memory blurs, where truth and terror entwine. And there's always another mystery waiting. So stay curious, stay brave, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, listen carefully. The knocking never really stops.